Right, so we are going to continue to look at this trend of creating a society that you would recognize, that you would fit into. Now, with the first industrial revolution back in chapter 19, we talked about how it caused new problems because cities were getting so big. London went from 1 million to 2 million people in about 5 decades, and that caused all kinds of problems, particularly sanitary problems, and it created problems that governments never had to deal with before. So we figured out on our own in chapter 19 that governments are going to have to do things that they've never done before. Well, in chapter 20, in the late 18, early 1900s, they begin to do those things. There's urban reform. So all of a sudden, there's this huge push by the voting class telling the government, you've got to fix this. So all of a sudden, health codes are created and building codes are created, and running water and drainage and sewer systems are created in these cities, and tax dollars are put towards all of this, and it makes for healthier, better living conditions. Even once again, even among the working class, things begin to improve. Now obviously the rich part of town get all the new stuff first, and then it moves its way towards the poor part of town. But even among the lower classes, all of a sudden you've got running water, clean running water. You've got drainage systems. You have sewer systems in those apartment complexes in the industrialized part of town where the lower classes live. And so cities are improving. And that means even more people can live in cities comfortably. And that's one of our trends. People are still leaving the countryside and they're moving into cities, and cities are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Even the social structure is changing. For thousands of years in Europe, you had some sort of aristocracy, whether it's the patricians or the nobility in the medieval era, and things are changing because money is changing that. Right? You have the new elite. Now, the new elite was made up of the old elite, the aristocracy, the old nobility, combined with the wealthy upper middle class. These were your wealthy industrialists and your wealthy bankers. In America, you would have names like J.P. Morgan, or the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, right? All those names probably sound very familiar to you. They make up the new elite. And what started to happen is the aristocracy, the old elite, the nobility, many of those old noble families needed an infusion of cash, right? And you had these wealthy, super wealthy commoners. So all of a sudden, it became acceptable for a member of the nobility to marry a commoner as long as that commoner was from this extremely wealthy upper class. So you had, for instance, you had members of like the Vanderbilt family or the Carnegie family that could marry a traditional uh, noble person, and it was seen as okay. So this makes the new elite. And the middle class itself, it's getting bigger once again. In the industrialized part of Europe and America, you're seeing the growth of the middle class because there are more ways to become middle class. You still have the old way. You've got the upper middle class that we were just talking about. That's part of the new elite, the industrialists, the bankers, the merchants. Then you have the solidly middle class, your traditional middle class, doctors, lawyers. But now there's new ways: business managers, engineers that design the machines, accountants that help manage all this massive amount of money, architects, chemists. Right? Then you have the lower middle class. These are your independent shopkeepers and traders, your prosperous peasants. Think of them as prosperous farmers, if you will. And then below the lower middle class, but above the lower class. So they're below lower middle. I know it sounds weird. They're below the lower middle, but above the low class, you have what's called the white collar workers. They're called white collar workers because, well, they would often wear white collar dress shirts to their jobs, right? These are traveling salespeople, bookkeepers, telephone operators, department store salespersons, secretaries, right? Sometimes in modern lingo, we call them paper pushers, right? The people that work like in the cubicles, right? White collar. So they are middle class, barely middle class, but middle class, right? And so you can see, look at the screen here, you can see all the ways that you could become middle class. And maybe you're a prosperous shopkeeper and you save enough money to send your son to school to become a doctor or become a lawyer, and he lifts the entire family into the solidly middle class. So you see, there's ways to move up now. It's creating more opportunities to become middle class and move up the ranks of the middle class from white collar to maybe lower middle or lower middle to solidly middle. And the middle class, right, they begin to develop middle class values. You hear that all the time in American politics. Both political parties say they represent middle class values. Well, what are those middle class values? It's the belief in hard work, that hard work has benefits just by itself, that you improve yourself through hard work. Etiquette, the right way of doing things. Many of these upper middle class, they didn't necessarily originally come from money. So to prove that they fit in, they become very conscious of doing everything properly. Right? Even had books of etiquette published during this time period to help them with that. Also, by and large, the middle class were also churchgoers. Right? And you think about modern American politics, oftentimes when a politician says, hey, I represent middle class values, that's what he or she is referring to, this idea of the American dream, that if you work hard, you should be able to succeed in life. Oftentimes, particularly in the American South, that's associated, middle class values is associated with Judeo-Christian morals as well. So we're starting to see a society you would truly recognize. Even among the working class, their lives are improving also in Western Europe because they now have the right to vote. A lot of the males do, and politicians go after those votes, and they begin to defend the rights of the working class. And so within the working class, you develop this system in which the man goes off to work, and he's the main breadwinner, and the wife stays at home.